Hey there, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome to Law and Crime Network Live. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the wildly popular Netflix series Tiger King, more specifically, Carole Baskin, one of the central figures who people believe murdered her husband, Don Lewis. He's been missing since 1997. Now, this documentary actually reignited the investigation into this case, but we're going to talk about what's really going on here. Now, a little bit later, we're also going to focus on the Lori Vallow Daybell case, the mother who's been charged in connection with the disappearance of her two children. We talked about it on Tuesday, but there's so many details to get through, we didn't have enough time. Now, I want to let you know this is a special program because we want to hear from you. We are taking your questions about both cases. If you have theories about what happened in both cases, write us. Questions about the investigation, write us. We're going to talk about it and break it all down. Let's start right now with Tiger King.
It's not every day that a zookeeper went to prison for murder for hire.
There are more captive tigers in the U.S. than there are in the wild throughout the world.
Animal people are nuts, man. They're all crazy. I'm sure y'all got a story to tell.
All right, all you cool cats and kittens, we're going to start this right now and bring in our guests. We got with us executive trial producer Cathy Russon and criminal defense attorney Mike Koribanicsl. It's great to have you both here. Cathy, I want to start with you. Weird situation, this Tiger King business. I was glued to the whole series. And what did we see? We saw Carole Baskin. She meets Don Lewis, her former husband, on the side of the road. They get married. He's a millionaire, ends up doing these business deals in Costa Rica. And then in 1997, he disappears. People who watch the documentary, they can say arguably the creators made it look like this woman killed her husband. Cathy, I'm going to ask you, based upon what you saw in the documentary and what you've seen in this investigation, what are the strongest clues to suggest that Carole was involved in the disappearance of her husband? Oh, okay, so I think Cathy, we're trying to work on Cathy's mic. I'm going to go to Mike. Mike, okay, so here's the thing. We're going to get into all the evidence here, whether it's the will, what was going on with the timing of this, and everything about there. The fact that the sheriff, Mike, looked at the documentary, watched it like all of us, and now has relaunched this investigation. It was a missing persons case. He never really closed it. But now that he's taking new leads, is that appropriate? And what exactly is he looking for?
Well, it's very appropriate. I mean, a lot of times in a murder investigation, what you run into is basically dead ends. And when you have a documentary like this, and the interesting thing is that I had to remind myself while watching it is there were investigations going on in other matters while this was unfolding. So with all the attention to it, people who might have thought something didn't mean anything previously may be reaching out to law enforcement now and saying, hey, wait a minute, there was something I saw that was peculiar, and the leads start again. It almost takes on a new life. It's a cold case that gets heated up, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Cathy, let's get into some of this evidence. I'm going to repeat the question. What did you see based upon the documentary and also the investigation itself? What are people really holding on to as the strongest clues that Carole was involved in the disappearance of Don? All right, so Cathy, I think we're having some trouble. Mike, I'm going to come back to you. Let's talk about the will. The will is weird. All right, here's the thing. Here's the thing with the will, Mike. There's a will where it would grant Carole the power of attorney in the event of Don's disappearance. Have you ever seen anything like that? Usually it says in the case of incapacitation or something like that, but in the case of his disappearance. Now, Carole has said that, look, she told him he was going down to Costa Rica. People disappear in Costa Rica. It was something that was appropriate for this will. What's your take on that?
It is almost so incredible. I've never heard of that before, although I'm a criminal defense attorney, not a wills and estates lawyer. But the whole thing is just amazing by the simple fact that they use that word. And you'd wonder why someone who would want to look innocent would use that word. So it has both sort of connotations to it. I'm sorry, something's going
Mike,
off here.
let's just make sense of this. Mike, it's okay. Let me ask you this. Is it possible that she could be charged with Don's murder if they never find the body? I know that's happened before, but given what you've seen in this case, right now the sheriff said there's nothing even suggesting there was a murder. So realistically, what could happen here?
Well, realistically, I mean, there obviously was that 5-year limitation with the disappearance where she really went and cashed in, I think, like the next day after the 5-year ran. You could have it. I think, though, what the sheriff is thinking is that when you're going to come that far along an investigation with such a serious charge and so much time has passed by, you really have to have everything aligned and in a row. You can't leave much for speculation. And I think they're probably looking into this investigation saying, we've waited this long. Let's get something a little more concrete. There's a lot of innuendo and circumstantial evidence, which we both know can be very devastating. But I think they really want to make sure they have it all together. And you're fighting people with a lot of money, too.
The first thing that everybody did after they watched this documentary is they went online, they tried to read articles about it, what's the latest in the case, and what we learned is that the last part of this investigation, Mike, was that Carole apparently refused to take a polygraph test. Now, the sheriff said that's because she said even taking a polygraph test wouldn't vindicate her. What do you think about that? Because apparently everybody else, according to the sheriff, agreed to take a polygraph test.
Well, I would never advise any client to take a polygraph test. That would be cold. When I say cold is you would think if you're going to take a polygraph test, you would have your client be subject to one prior to taking the state's polygraph, because I mean, it's still, although it's used in the science, there's still a lot of discrepancies in polygraphs. And really, what is the upside? I tend to agree with Carole in that context, because what's the upside of her taking it? There's been so much generation of speculation as to her role in her husband's murder as a result of this documentary. I don't see any upside. I would not advise her to take one.
Documentary, what have we learned about that?
I'm sorry, Jesse, I didn't hear you.
Your audio was out.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Cathy, let me go to you about this. The septic tank, the meat grinder, they were their own characters in the Netflix documentary. What have we learned about those as possible ways that Carole Baskin could have allegedly disposed of the body of Don Lewis? What have we learned about that, Cathy?
Well, I'll tell you that was a huge thing in the documentary, right? So everyone's talking that she fed her husband to the tigers and used the meat grinder, and that he may be buried in the septic tank. Well, the Hillsborough sheriff did a press conference the other day, and he dispelled both of those. He said the septic tank was placed on the property years after Don disappeared. He also said that it was his understanding the meat grinders had also been removed from the property long before he disappeared. Don's will, and in it, it says, if I go missing, ... Who says that in a will? Who says if I go missing? Nobody says that. So I think that's the strongest piece of evidence.
Well, I mean, look, she said he talked to her about Costa Rica and there were all these problems there, people disappearing. She thought it was appropriate. Cathy, we got a question a lot. We're getting a bunch of questions right now about this case. So question is for you, Cathy, was there any formal medical diagnosis for Don as having any kind of dementia? Or is that purely hearsay of Carole Baskin? Remember, she said that in the time before Don's disappearance, he was mentally deteriorating, and there, who knows what exactly happened to him? Who knows where he went? Any evidence to support Carole's claim?
I have seen nothing. I've seen nothing about that, and I have done a lot of research in this case. I have seen no evidence, and we do know that Don's ex-wife and his children say that they know nothing of that as well.
All right, we're getting into a lot right now. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back live here on the Law&Crime Network. Well, here we are on Law&Crime Network Live, and we thank everybody for joining us. We're taking your questions right now about Carole Baskin, a central figure in the Tiger King documentary. And a little bit later on, we're also going to talk about Lori Vallow Daybell. But I want these questions to keep on coming. We just got a new question, Mike, and I want to turn to you. The question is, I thought if you don't find the body, you can't get all the money and the life insurance. So again, the theory is that Carole got rid of Don in order to collect on his money, his inheritance. And what do you think about that? The idea that if you can't find the body, you can't get all the money.
Well, I think that's contractual law, and that depends a lot on the insurance policies and the life insurance policies he's taken. I do believe there is a time sort of time threshold that you have to meet before the body's presumed dead. I mean, if according to that, if someone was involved in an airplane crash and they never recovered the body, then those people wouldn't be able to collect on a policy. I don't think that's the state of the law.
Cathy, do you find it strange that the police have posted this new lead saying we're looking for anybody that has leads, but they haven't spoken to Carole Baskin as of yet, and they haven't spoken to any one of the Lewis family as of yet? So they're just basing their new investigation, or I should say they're continuing their investigation, purely on the Netflix documentary.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it, that a Netflix documentary can make it so a sheriff holds a press conference and all these new tips come in. I don't know. You know, we're not really privy to all of the investigation that's gone into this. Obviously, police don't release everything when it comes to their investigation. We do know the sheriff said that Carole Baskin refused to take a polygraph and that she was the only one that didn't cooperate with that. We don't know what that means. We don't know who else took polygraphs. I think it's fascinating in this day and age that something like this, a show, can renew this investigation.
I mean, this is 2020. We see it a lot. It happens constantly. When people are hooked into something, it's obviously going to spawn a lot more from it. And Cathy, I want to ask you the last question here. What do you think the next steps are with this? I know that Joe Exotic, obviously the central figure, the main figure of the documentary, he is in prison, obviously convicted and sentenced for trying to kill Carole Baskin. He was the one who floated this idea that perhaps she fed her husband to the tigers. What do you think the next steps are? Because Carole has adamantly denied this, and she accurately said there has been no evidence linking her to any kind of murder.
I mean, without Don showing up or his body showing up, I'm not sure that case is going to go anywhere. I don't know what else police can do. If they get some secret tip in, they would still have to have either his body or something tying her to it. I just don't see that happening. As far as Joe's concerned, he's sitting in federal prison. He has, he's on appeal now. He's written up an appeal. He's asking President Trump to pardon him or to allow him out on bail so he can investigate. He says he was set up by the guy that took over his zoo. I mean, this case, I don't think we've heard the end of it.
And you know what? We haven't heard the end of questions. We got more coming in. Mike, here's a good question. Why do you suppose Carole's saying to Don's kids, if you talk about this, you get no more money? Is that just being having a strong legal stance, or is this a threat?
It was very, it's funny, Jesse, you bring that up, because when they were interviewing them in, I guess, their living room, it struck me as rather peculiar to have that kind of statement being made. And it shows, this Carole Baskin comes across throughout the whole series as a very strong, centered, and intimidating kind of person, and someone who knows how to use leverage wherever they can find it. I don't think that those kind of statements help her, but I think this case is far from closed. And don't discount Joe, Exotic Joe, or the Tiger King, however you like to refer him, as not giving up more information as to other people, because this seems to be like a small community of tiger owners, and it seems everybody has a lot on everybody that can help them out of legal difficulty. So don't be surprised if he starts a whole nother investigation by things he gives up in hopes of lessening his sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's the last time we heard Joe Exotic or Carole Baskin. I do want to switch topics, though, and I want to take some time to focus more on Lori Vallow Daybell, because, again, while we talked about this on Tuesday, there was so much more to get into. Cathy, here's the interesting thing that we didn't get a chance to talk to. What's the motivation here? Why would a woman put her children in danger? Why would she dispose of her children? Why would she kill her children? Again, she hasn't been charged with murder, but the question is, what is the motivation behind all of this? What is the motivation behind her being involved in the disappearance of her children, as well as potentially being involved or associated in the deaths of 3 people? I say this because we know that her ex, as well as her current husband's ex, are both dead in arguably suspicious circumstances, and Lori Vallow's brother, who was involved in one of those killings, is dead himself. So the question, of course, is what would be the motivation behind all of this, Cathy?
Jesse, I'm so obsessed with this case. I find myself late at night reading more and more about this case. It's fascinating. It's like a bad movie script. If somebody wrote this as a movie, you'd be like, oh, you guys are so ridiculous. So part of this, I mean, we're calling it a cult in quotes. Part of their belief system, apparently, from the information that's out there, is that they believe there are times when the spirit is forced from the person's body and it's held out in limbo while Satan is taking over the body. Sometimes there's a worm that takes over the body. And they basically become zombies. And the only way to get that spirit out of limbo is to kill the body. Now, this is all in some documents that I read. So if we take that and walk that down the road, if Lori Vallow is responsible for killing her children, they're missing right now. We don't know that they're dead. Did she think they were zombies? Did she think their spirits were pushed out and the only way to save them was to kill their bodies? I'm telling you, people around this couple are dying or have been shot at. Like, we know that Lori Vallow's niece's now ex-husband says he was shot at and he believes her brother did it. Like, people are dying around this duo. And now when you read some of the beliefs, it's very interesting. I wonder if they're going to at some point start talking and say they believe these people were zombies.
Well, Mike, that's the question. We don't really know a lot of what's going on, and with all of these investigations underway, do you find it strange that she has been charged with what she's been charged with in respect to abandoning these children, in contempt, a multitude of charges? She hasn't been charged with anyone's murder, although we all know, as we talked about earlier, you could be charged with the murder of somebody, even if you can't find the body. So do you find it interesting, Mike, that she has been charged, yet we're still investigating the deaths of 3 people and the disappearance of 2 children? Did they charge her too prematurely?
I don't think so. I think I understand their strategy, Jesse, and I think their strategy is they need more evidence, and once you have enough evidence for a crime and you could incarcerate somebody and hold them, the government or the state has great leverage. And I think what they're hoping is there are a lot of missing pieces, and they hope by having her incarcerated on this charge that it will put pressure on her or force others to come forward with some testimonial evidence that could lead to physical evidence that could lead to a successful prosecution in all these murders. I mean, this is like it's almost like an opera, this whole scenario. You need a chart to follow it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a family tree that's pretty incredible to watch. Mike, I want to ask you a follow-up question here. If this were to go to trial, how would she even defend herself, in the sense that if she is claiming she knows where these kids are, Chad Daybell said the kids are okay, how are you going to defend yourself? If you know where the kids are, how are you ever going to be able to defend yourself?
Jesse, I think that's an excellent question. And it really, in reviewing the case, it really came to my mind. There's a very interesting conflict here between her Fifth Amendment rights and the well-being of these children. She could easily claim the Fifth Amendment, and I think the judge would have to give a jury instruction is she's under no duty to come forth with any evidence to prove her innocence. It's the state's burden to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. I think that's going to be a very interesting and unique point of law that's going to have to be very crucial in the prosecution of this case.
All right, Mike, I'll give you a follow-up question. We just got one from one of our viewers. Does this set this up perfectly for the insanity defense?
Well, I don't believe so, because to put forth the insanity defense, you have to say, I know what happened and I'm responsible for what happened, but I'm not responsible because I'm insane. She's basically, her position is, I'm not saying anything. She's coming across in the limited at Law and Crime. We've seen her arraignment. We saw her come from Hawaii back to Idaho. She seemed very competent. She seemed very alert. There's nothing in any of the 5 or 6 months that these two children have been missing to indicate that she had any sort of mental breakdown, other than her husband's divorce papers. It said she was just leaning more towards a cult, in quotation marks, and their beliefs about the doomsday that's coming. And I don't think that helps her.
Cathy, what is the evidence that we've seen that the kids are actually in danger? Is it the storage unit?
Okay, so we do have surveillance footage from a storage unit that Lori rented in Idaho, and it shows her and who they believe was her brother Alex carrying in heavy totes and back and forth. They shows her and Chad Daybell coming back and forth. Then they go to Hawaii and they abandon that storage unit. So the owner let the media in and filmed what was left in the storage unit. The only thing there are everything about the kids: baby books, photo albums, baby pictures, bicycles, everything to do with the kids are just left abandoned. Now, as a mom, I'm not leaving those pictures behind. So that says to me, she knows that the kids aren't coming back, maybe. Also, she told different stories prior to the police actually investigating. Relatives have been trying to get a hold of, especially JJ, the little boy. The grandparents were trying to like FaceTime with him, and Lori gave different excuses. Well, apparently she said, he's visiting family in Arizona, he's here. Tylee, the daughter, is at college, and it turns out none of that was true.
It's so eerie and so scary because these kids have been missing since September. So if anybody has information, they're probably, and they should come forward immediately. Cathy, Mike Koribanicsl, thank you so much for coming on. Visit us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, our YouTube channel. We thank everybody for joining us. Please stay safe, and we'll be back. Thank you.